I'm looking to find where the center of the first signature is. And I place a bookmarker down. And I'm going to begin by pushing the needle through the holes from the original stitching and then marking their location on the front of the end sheet. I do this with all of the holes that have stitches in them. If there are holes that do not have stitches going through them, I don't mark them. Now I'm going to punch through where my markings are. It's important to go from the inside of the fold towards the outside. If you try and punch through the outside of the fold, it's very difficult to get it right in the center of the crease. So I flip my page back and forth so that I can see exactly where my markings are on the outside. Now using a linen thread, I'm going to cut about 3 times the length of the book, a little bit more. I'm using a bookbinding needle, and since the needle's a bit bigger than the thread, then I can tie it in a knot and it will still go through. Begin by opening up to my first signature and going through the first hole, and I leave a tail hanging out of the bottom. Now I'm going to go through the first hole of the end sheet and up through the second hole. It's very important when you're stitching in a book to always pull in the direction of the stitching. So in this case I'm working up, so I pull my thread up to tighten it. And I go in through my second hole of my signature, and now I'm going to tie my knot. So I cross the stitching over and I go with my needle under all of the stitching. And there will be a loop hanging down, and I put my needle through that loop. Now I'm going to do it again. I go underneath all of the stitching, and there's an opening. I put my needle through the opening and pull it tight. Now I'm going to go back out through the very bottom hole and into the second hole in the text block. So now I've come back into my signature. Now I go back out through the third hole. So all of my stitching at this point inside the text block will sit between the original stitching of the book. And I go in through the hole of the end sheet that is directly above where I came out through the next hole up, and in through the corresponding hole in the text block. And every time that I pull it tight, I'm making sure to pull up in the direction that I'm stitching. If you pull down in the other direction, you can tear the pages. just making sure that my thread doesn't get twisted and tangled. Now I've come in through the very top hole, and I'm going to pull my thread down and go underneath all of the stitches, and I have a loop that I put my needle through. And then I pull it tight, and I'm going to repeat that, going under all the stitches. Now I cut the end of my threads. I use my micro spatula to get a little bit of glue on it, and I glue my knots just to reinforce them, glue the stitching. So I'm basically doing a little bit of a tip in here. This gives it just a very thin line of glue along the fold. And then I'm going to place my wax paper in there so that it doesn't adhere too far out. Now I've cut a piece of super that is slightly shorter than the length of my text block and the width of my text block plus 1.5 inches. And I'm going to place glue along the spine. Really making sure that I'm pushing the glue into the signatures. And then placing my super onto it. So I have about 3/4 of an inch hanging off on each side. And smoothing it down. And pulling it tight. And then I'm going to place it under weights until it dries. Now I have both sides of my end sheets sewn, my supers in place. I'm going to trim my end sheets down to length. So I place my ruler under the text block with a little edge sticking out and then cut off that extra. Wait till this point to do this because in the stitching process, if you cut your end sheets to the perfect size, they could end up being too short after you've stitched it on. Now my case, and I'm going to take a look at it for fit, see how it lines up in there. Once I'm happy with the fit, I'm going to glue it in. So I place a piece of waste paper under the end sheet, and I start by gluing under the super, and then laying the super down and gluing on top of it. You really want to make sure you get a good amount of glue in that hinge area, the area closest to the spine. Also, you always want to spread the glue in the direction of the grain of the paper. If you start spreading the glue in the other direction, you can stretch the paper as well as buckle it. Make sure I have a nice even coating all over the paper, but not too thick. I'm working towards the outside edges so that you don't get glue under the paper. Now remove the waste paper and carefully lay down the cover of the book. Once you lay it down, you can check it for fit. If it's not a perfect fit, you can still push the text block around a little bit until you smooth it down with a bone folder. It's still a little bit movable. Now I'm smoothing it down with the bone folder, cleaning up any extra glue that squishes out. And then place a piece of wax paper in there. Define your hinge with your bone folder. Put rods on the hinge and then put the book in the book press to dry. Here's the finished book with the new end sheets in place.